Great. Welcome, everyone. In recognition of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which takes place this Saturday, January 27th, I'm so glad that you could join us for this afternoon's author talk about the book, Tutti's Promise, the story of the Lichtenstern family's experience during the Holocaust, their journey of courage to stay alive and protect others along the way. Books will be available after the talk for purchase. Please join me in welcoming author Heidi Fishman.
All right, so first of all, can everybody, oh, I can't stay there. Can everybody hear me, or do I need to use that microphone thing? I'm good? If you can't hear me, if I just wave your hand, yell at me, do something like that. All right, so Tutti is my mom. When I was a kid, I didn't really ask questions. I knew my mom was a survivor. I knew my grandparents were survivors. I knew my uncle was a survivor. And I thought, okay, people survived the Holocaust. So they're all over the place, these survivors. Big deal. This is when I was a kid. As I got older, I learned more about what this was all about. And I was like, no, this is a story that is significant. And there's not survivors everywhere to tell the story. And after my mom came to my kids' middle school to tell her story, I said, Mom, this needs to be a book. Somebody's got to write this book. What famous author do we know that we can ask to write the book? Jodi B. Colt lives near me, but I really didn't have the gumption to ask her to do it. And I didn't want it to be a fictional book. I really wanted it to be the true story. So I said, I'll give it a try. I thought it would be easy to write a book. How hard can it be, right? My mom knows the story. She tells it. I'll just write down what she says and I'll have a book. And I kind of did that for a first draft, and it was the worst thing ever. Nobody's going to ever want to read this. So I figured out I had to do research. I had to do a lot of research because my mom was just a kid when it happened. She had some memories. She didn't remember everything. And there was a lot of holes, a lot of pieces of the puzzle she didn't know. So let me start with the basics. So she was born in 1935 in Germany. And in 1936, before she was a year old, the family said, we're getting out of Germany. We don't want to be around Hitler. We're going to go to Amsterdam. That's the capital of Holland or the Netherlands. And in Amsterdam, it'll be safe because during World War II, World War I, they were a neutral country. They're not going to get into this mess. They'll stay out of it. So they moved to Amsterdam. My grandfather had a job. Everything was fine. My mom's little brother was born. And then the Nazis invaded. Okay. So all of a sudden, it wasn't safe. Now, when I was doing research, I talked to so many people. I tried to figure out, what do I need to know? What was it really like there? This postcard is from one of the survivors that I spoke to. It was a situation that my mom didn't remember what happened. I had documentation that this woman was in the same place as my mom, on the same truck, on the same day. I tracked her down. I called her. She talked to me. I interviewed her, and I incorporated what she said about that day into my mom's experience because they were same place, same time, everything. And then she sent me this postcard after I sent her the book. And she said, how did you catch that atmosphere? So what I'm going to try to do is talk you through just a few pages of the book and everything I had to do to catch the atmosphere. Because it's not easy if you're trying to write about something. I wasn't born yet. I wasn't there. This was all on my research, trying to figure out how to explain this. So we're going to start with, this is a short little video. I hope this is going to work. You can hear it, of my mom explaining one particular situation. We'll listen to her explain it, and then we'll figure out how I'm going to write about that.
One day, standing at the window, and I had a doll which had a pinkish, very bright pink outfit on, and there were several people in the apartment. It was close quarters, and there was a roundup going on down below in the streets. There was a lot of shouting and somebody pulling me very unkindly and very harshly away from the window. They thought the pink of the doll would draw too much attention from down below. But that's the first recollection I have from being in the ghetto part of Amsterdam.
So, first of all, Eyewitness is a great website to get information about the Holocaust. So my mom remembers standing at the window, a pink doll, and somebody being mad at her because she was too close to the window and the soldiers might see her. But that's not a whole chapter. That's not so I said that's not that interesting. So I went onto historical archive sites, U.S. Holocaust Museum books. I find these pictures. These are pictures of actual roundups in Amsterdam. Not necessarily the one my mom watched, but these are things that were really happening. This is not movies. This is not made up. This is real. So you got soldiers and you got people with their hands up. You know, the people being pushed into the truck with dogs, snarling at them. People being pulled, wait on the sidewalk until the truck comes to take you away. This is what I was trying to capture, these kind of scenes. I also went to Amsterdam. Where did the particular situation happen? Well, this is the street that my mom lived on during when she saw it. And this lit up window up here, right there, that's the window of their apartment. So I was able to, it's like up here somewhere. This is where she was. And that kind of scene we just looked at is going on outside. When I start putting that together, it starts helping formulate in my head what I'm trying to write. I go a little further, and when I went to Amsterdam, I sent a letter to the address of where my mom lived during that year. I said, my mother is a Holocaust survivor. She lived in your apartment in 1942 or 43, whichever date this one was. Can I see the apartment? Can I come? And I was graciously invited in. And so this is the view from the window. Now, modern. I don't think it's changed much except for maybe the style of the cars and the height of the trees, maybe. And that's the window from the inside. So then I could sort of put my mom actually, thinking of her at 7 years old at that windowsill. And that's when she experienced what happened. I also took a picture from 1943 of my mom and her little brother, Robbie. That they were little. These were the kids that were watching that scene. So I'm going to read the scene to you now. So think about what my mom said a few minutes ago on how she explained it. And then this is how I turned it into the story. So it teaches the history, but it doesn't sound like a textbook, because when I was in middle school, I really didn't like textbooks. So, come, Tutti, look, Robbie begged. He had his nose and two hands pressed against the window, trying to see what was responsible for the shouting and the other noises coming from the street. Tutti didn't really want to look, but she didn't want Robbie to call her a baby either. After all, she was 8 and he was only 5. She knew they were supposed to stay away from the window in their tiny apartment on Afrikanerplein. Mommy had told them that repeatedly. But she decided to peek for just a minute so he would stop pestering her. What she saw was frightening and confusing. There were men, women, and children gathered across the street. Families were clutching each other. Soldiers seemed to be yelling and pushing people into trucks. Police dogs strained against their short leashes, barking and baring their teeth. Tutti didn't want to watch, but she somehow couldn't turn away. Her feet were stuck. Her eyes were fixated on the tumult across the street. Without realizing it, she hugged Ruja to her chest in the same desperate way that the women outside were clinging to their babies. Tutti tried to make out their faces. Was that Ursula? Ursula had been in her class at school. And was that Mr. and Mrs. Yoel who lived downstairs? The commotion made it impossible to tell exactly what was happening, but it looked like people were being taken away. Was that Mrs. Yoel? She seemed to be carrying a cat. Tutti didn't think the Yoels even had a cat. It was hard to see, so she pressed herself against the window to get a better view. A moment later, someone grabbed Tutti from behind. She screamed and dropped Ruja, then clutched at the curtain. It was the soldiers. They had come for her, and she was going to be taken away in one of those terrible trucks. "Mommy!" she screamed. She knew she wasn't supposed to stand by the window. If she had just listened to Mommy instead of letting Robbie talk her into looking, then this wouldn't be happening. She would never disobey Mommy again, would never misbehave, if only they wouldn't take her away. Someone spun her roughly around, but the person she came to face with wasn't a soldier. It was their neighbor, Mrs. Oberlander, who was yelling something. Tutti was so confused that she could barely stand, let alone comprehend what was being said to her. But finally she understood. Don't stand by the window with that pink doll. As Tutti let go of the curtain, the woman snatched her up, shut the curtains, and carried her away. "Mommy, Mommy, I, Tutti could hardly get the words out between her sobs. She didn't know if her tears were coming from fear or relief. "I just wanted to see who they were taking away. I thought I saw Ursula down there." So that's what I turned this into. Again, when I started, oh, it's easy. I'll just write down what Mom said. But you can't just write down what Mom said, because she says it very matter-of-factly and with no emotion, and it's a memory from that interview was 30 years ago, maybe, that we saw, and it was already 50 years since the time it happened. So, all right, I'm going to do another chapter that again, I'm going to start with what my mom said, and then we're going to work into a whole lot more research. Anyway, actually, questions about that one before I get into another scene?
Just a compliment.
Oh.
That, what you wrote was in the voice of a little girl.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
It
It wasn't just telling the story, but you really, I could hear a little girl.
Thank you. I think it helps that my training is as a psychologist. So I've learned how to, know people at different ages and things. My training wasn't as a writer, though. So as I was trying to figure out how to write the book, I was going back to school. I was going to community college, even though I have a doctoral degree. I was like, go back to school, learn how to write. So, all right. How do I? Okay, another scene here.
I remember going into hiding. Here again, it's a very vague memory. It's somebody from my father's office. He was Jewish. He was married to a Gentile, so they were quote unquote safe. And he put us up in his attic. But once again, in Amsterdam South, I see a very big street, lots of trees, a very wide boulevard, and at the end, one of the larger canals going perpendicular to it. So I must have had some concept that this is where I am now. I'm going into hiding. I won't see it, otherwise probably wouldn't make such a, strong impression.
How old were you about when this has happened?
7.5.
7.5, 8. And how long were we in this attic?
I don't know. I think only about 3 or 4 weeks. Short time. A short time.
Do you remember anything that you did in the attic?
No.
You remember some activities?
No. I don't remember anything. 4 lined up one next to each other, 4 twin beds next to each other. But other than that, I don't know how I spent the day or what we did. I remember my parents having discussions about whether we should stay or not stay.
Okay, so all I knew about hiding in an attic was Anne Frank, right? We assume the adults in this room know who Anne Frank was and what she went through. The kids in the know and the students know Anne Frank. Yep. So her hiding in an attic was very well prepared. There was months and months of her father stockpiling food and the bookcase that was hiding the stairs, and it was really thought out. My grandfather deciding they're going to go hide in an attic was like an overnight decision. So it was not that same kind of prepared situation. So I couldn't base anything on Anne Frank. Couldn't think about that. I did ask my mom who hid you? Who was this person that, with the Gentile wife who hid? And it was Leopold Klopfer, who was somebody who worked with my grandfather. So this is a card from the Amsterdam archives. I was able to pull up online. I didn't even have to go there. This is just from home, Google searching, getting into archives, finding, I think I had to pay 10 cents a page to print them out. And I figured out this was the right guy because my mom said his wife's name was Adele. So here we have the wife, and her third name is Adele, Elizabeth Ann Adele. And he's from Cologne, which is the same place where the family lived in Germany before they moved to Amsterdam. All right, I got the right person. And the address is 39 Michelangelo, no, not 39, 105, second floor, Michelangelo Strut. I have an address. I can figure out what the attic looked like, what kind of a building it is. It's not a New England house with a pitched roof and a little attic up top. It's very different in the heart of Amsterdam. So then I went to this part of the Amsterdam archive, and I find out it's a building with many floors. Hoog, which I'm not saying right, I can't pronounce Dutch words, means floor or level. So in the Netherlands, when they talk about floors, they have the house level at the first floor. Then the first, number one is what we call the second floor. Number two is what we call the third floor. It's a little confusing for Americans to look at this. But the Klopfers lived on the second floor. Up here is the attic. So somebody was living in between. That to me was something which I thought I'd better pay attention to. If somebody is in between, who is in between? Friend or foe? So this is the card for the third level for 105 Michelangelo Strut. Again, Google searching from home. And I find that Bernard Werthauer moved into that apartment in 1924, and moved in 1929, and he left on the 29th of April 1944, and he went to Germany. So now I'm thinking we've got a building where the person who lives underneath the attic went to Germany in 1944. I'm really getting worried now. Who is this guy? Is he a German? Is he a Nazi sympathizer? I don't know. I don't know what that meant. To me, that was like danger, you know? So I did a little more searching, and I found Bernard's card in the Amsterdam archive. And he went to Germany. Deutschland means Germany in 1944. All right, what else do I know? His wife is from Germany. They're German. And I look a little further, and this handwriting up here, it took me a while to figure out. overlaid in his death. He died in May of 1944, not too long after he went to Germany. But this is the Polish word for Auschwitz. It's a Jewish family that were right below the attic. They were found and they went to Auschwitz and he was killed. Okay, so I'm no longer worried about the people downstairs, but I am worried about who knows who's in that building. There's raids coming to that building. What's this all about? I'm sad that this guy, he's killed in Auschwitz. I'm sad he can't tell me anything about any of this. Although he never would have, because he was born in 98, and that means 1898. So he would have, even if he never found a war, if this never happened to him, he would have been long dead. What about his kids? He has 3 kids, okay? And the youngest, Ellen, was born in 1933. She was just 2 years older than my mom. Could the kids have survived? The dad didn't, but could the kids have survived? How am I going to answer this question? The U.S. Holocaust Museum has a database of victims and survivors of the Holocaust. I found Ellen Werthauer, born September 1933, and she's on a Dutch survivor list. Ellen made it. Yay, Ellen made it. Okay, so what am I going to do with that information? Well, I Google Ellen Werthauer. I find that she lives in California. She's married. She has a different last name. She just talks about her experience during the Holocaust. I find her phone number, I call her, and she talks to me. And so I asked her if she knew that there was a family hiding in the attic above their apartment. And she's like, no, there was nobody in our attic. We were just trying to get through. I said, no. The Klopfers from downstairs had them hiding in the attic. Oh no, the Klopfers were terrible, nasty people. I said, no, they were my grandfather's friends and they helped. They were terrible people. And I said, why do you say they're terrible? She told me 2 stories. So the first story is that before the war, she and her friends used to have dance parties in the living room. They'd turn up the music and they'd be dancing around. And downstairs, the Klopfers' chandelier would shake and the crystals would fall off and fall on the floor and break. And then he'd come up and yell at her. Okay? She was a little kid and he would yell at her. That's number 1, terrible person. Number 2, the Werthauers were hiding extra food. They got extra food because everything was rationed. And they were hiding it under the floorboards. And something that maybe cheese or something, they hid under the floorboards and it was hot and it's got greasy and it's dripping through the ceiling. And the Klopfers are coming up there saying, you got extra food, you have to share it with us. And she thought this was terrible. I'm sure their whole family thought it was terrible. And I said, well, maybe he said you had to share it because they were trying to feed the family in the attic that they didn't have the extra ration cards for. And maybe that helped my mom survive. And she was a little nicer all of a sudden on the phone. So, she was nice to me, but she softened to the Klopfers. She didn't think they were such terrible people anymore. So that was a really interesting conversation. All right, I also thought about maps, where all these places are in Amsterdam. It's difficult. And when I was in Amsterdam, I actually walked this route because the family had been hiding here. This was their address. Not hiding, this is where they were living, sorry. And then they were hiding over here at this address. And they had to go from point A to point B walking because Jews didn't have cars, didn't have bicycles, weren't allowed to use the public transportation. They had to take everything with them that they could carry, but they had to not look suspicious. So my mom told me the story that she and her brother had to wear like 5 sets of clothes layered so they could get there without carrying a suitcase, so to speak. And, they're 5 and 7 years old, and so, the mom and the dad and the little kids, and they're trying to get everything over there. And so I really wanted to think about the route. What would that have been like to get to the attic, to go into hiding? And then these are some pictures I took when I was trying to figure it out. So here's the canal that's right near that address. So when my mom said she remembers a large canal, there it is. You could see it from the window. This is the building. It would be like right around in the edge of this corner over here where their attic room. And then when I was walking, these kids drew my attention. There's birds, there's seagulls and pigeons and little kids and a mom. And I was thinking, feeding the birds, and that's really universal. And, entertaining your kids outdoors. It just seemed it was like a little scene I want to somehow get into my story. I'm sure my mom wasn't actually feeding the birds because they would have been keeping every bit of food for themselves, but somehow interacting with the birds. And again, I wrote a letter to the people who lived in that apartment now. I said, my mom hid in your attic for about a month during 1943. Can I come see your attic? They welcomed me in. So this is the view from the attic window in 2015. The high-rise buildings wouldn't have been there at the time, but this building would have been there. You can see the canal. And here's the attic room. It wasn't there anymore because they had renovated. They had redone that whole upper floor, but they were able to show me saying, this is what it looked like before we renovated. There were two rooms basically identical side by side. I really don't know if it was this room or the one next to it, but they were identical, she said. It was very typical in Europe to have a sink in a bedroom. That's sort of a typical European thing, and a bathroom down the hall. And this would have been like the maid's room. Upstairs, the top room would have been a maid for this apartment, another maid for that apartment, or the cook for that apartment. That's how things were set up. And then I tried to pull all of this together. How do you write about a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old in this little room for a month, and getting there? Again, I had to pull all my clues into one place. And so you can try to find, where are my clues? As they got close to Michelangelo's Strut, Margaret paused at the canal, pointing out the sights, the beautiful elm trees beginning to turn gold, the green-brown water in the canal that was never quite still, and the ducks paddling in slow circles. Heinz realized that she didn't know how long it would be until the children could run and play outside, and she wanted to make sure that they had beautiful images of the outdoors to carry them through their time in hiding. Children, Margaret, let's get inside, Heinz said after a moment. It's almost 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock was the curfew time. No Jews on the street after 8 o'clock. Bobby Klopfer met them at the door and led them to a small room on the 4th floor in this part of town. In this part of town, the apartment buildings had been built for well-to-do families, with attics designed to house people's servants. 10 or 20 years ago, there would have been a maid or a cook living in this room. For now, it had 4 cots, a small table, and a sink. There was a tiny bathroom down the hall, which Klopfer explained they could use whenever he let them know that the coast was clear. Tutti was tired from the walk and overheated from her layered clothing, and she looked around in confusion. Mommy, why are we here? She asked. I already explained that to you, Tutti. I know why we left home, but you said we were visiting the Klopfers. They have a nice place with a big chandelier in the living room. I remember it. This isn't their house. Oh, Tutchen, this is their house. They live on the 2nd floor. This is their storage room. Why can't we be in the nice rooms? Asked Robbie. Because if anyone visits, they'll know we're here. It has to be a secret. As a matter of fact, I want you to both take your shoes off right now. Margaret bent down and started to untie Robbie's shoes. Why do we need to take our shoes off, Mommy? Asked Tutti. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Klopfer live on the 2nd floor. The Werthauers live on the 3rd floor. That means our floor is their ceiling. I don't want them to hear us walking around up here. Socks are much quieter. As long as we're living here, we won't wear shoes. Tutti realized that it was another strange new rule. She tried to remember them all. The stars, the Jewish schools, the curfew, and now no shoes. She took them off and walked over to the window in her stocking feet. No, Tutti, Heinz intercepted her before she could open the curtain. These curtains must stay shut. Can't I watch the ducks on the canal? If you can see out, then somebody can see in, and nobody can know that we're here. Her father wore his sternest expression. But it's dark here, said Robbie. He was tired too, so it came out as a whine. It was Margaret who answered. It isn't dark, she said. We have a small lamp, and we have each other. We have to be very quiet. Nobody can know we're here. So again, I took my mom's very dry answers to the interview, fleshed out with all this other information, threw it back in, and that's what came out. And so each time I just read you, that was 2 pages. Before I read you 2 pages, it took me 5 years. It was 5 years of doing research, asking mom questions, going places, talking to people to pull that all together. While I was going back to community college and taking extra classes in writing, because I never learned how to write when I was in college. Well, I didn't learn how to write creative writing. I learned how to write a dissertation, stuff like that, which is not creative writing. So it's historical fiction, but it's only fiction because I made up all that dialogue. All the scenes are true. These are things that really happened. And in order to write a book like that, you can't just listen to one person's story. You have to listen to lots of people's stories and get different viewpoints on the same event that happened. The person who saw it from this side isn't exactly the same as the person who saw it from this side. I had my great-grandfather's diary, which my mom had translated from German to English, so that was really helpful because I had what he had to say. Photos, we still have family. I don't know how all these family photos survived. I think my grandmother was giving them to friends all over the place for safekeeping as the war got going. And a lot of historical documents and a lot of archives. The things just kept popping up. So that's the basic story. I can answer questions.
So I was wondering if you thought of writing from a different person's perspective, like your mother's first person, and why did you choose the person?
Okay. So what perspective to write a book from? So first, when I first started, okay, so there's the doll that I referred to in the first scene, but there's an even more important doll that comes later in the book. And somebody said, write it from the doll's point of view. I'm like, that'd be interesting. That'd be a real children's book. And I tried to figure out how to do that, but the doll doesn't show up till halfway through the story. So I was like, how is the doll going to have a point of view if it wasn't there for the first half of important things that happened? I couldn't do everything as a flashback. There's no way. So that didn't work. I tried doing some chapters from mom, some from my grandmother, and some from my grandfather. So I was switching back and forth, and I got myself so confused. I said, that's just not a good idea. So it's just really sort of a narrator, an omniscient narrator point of view, but I really tried to capture what would my mom have been thinking at that moment, and what would my grandfather have been thinking at that moment. What would my grandmother say in that kind of situation? Just channel your grandparents. You can, what they would say.
I was just wondering also, who in your mind was the reader? Is it a teenager? Is it an adult?
I was thinking 7th grade.
Right.
That was really, my mom came and spoke to my kids in 7th and 8th grade. And I was like, they were just responding to her story. They were just soaking it up. And I'm like, that's who I'm writing for, those kids, the ones that my mom won't be able to tell the story to when she can't do this anymore. So I was thinking middle grade, although I'm getting lots of feedback from adults who are liking the book. And then, the publisher said, let's say ages 10 and up, because I didn't write it as a difficult 8th grade, 7th grade book. I wrote it as a easy reader, but I didn't want the reading to be hard because the material is hard. The lessons in there are difficult. It's drama. It's real drama. Yeah.
I really enjoyed your mother's story. And from your hearing now, knowing how you wrote it, why. But what I really missed in the book was a horror that existed all around.
Okay.
That
Yep.
what she didn't know, and she wasn't aware of it.
Right.
Her parents were, your grandparents.
Right.
What was going on around? I missed.
Yeah. It was. I hint at it, but I didn't want to in your face, because there are so many books that it is in your face. Night. That's a fantastic book, but Elie Wiesel was not writing for children. He was writing to get it out. He was writing for adults. He was writing. That's horror. I was trying to make this, best I can say it, is a gentle Holocaust book. There are scenes where it gets rough. You can hear it in my grandfather's voice. He's ready to call it quits. What am I going to do? And he has to say goodbye to the family at one point. And I think I tried to grab the difficulty there. But my mom says she doesn't remember death. She doesn't remember seeing people die. Right. We just.
My dragon brother-in-law of mine, who lives right here now, who's his age, who lived through this, and doesn't want to know anything about it.
Right. Well, if you live through it, you don't need to keep reading about it or talking about it. That's a lot of people won't, which is one reason why I wanted to write it down. Again, from the 7-year-old, 8-year-olds
No, I think
level.
it's important from your mother's rather than separate your mother's.
Well, my mother's 7-year-old self. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And they were in Western Europe. Western Europe was not as horrible as Eastern Europe. If the family had been living in Poland, this would have been a very different story. They were very lucky. I wouldn't be here. Yeah. I saw another hand over on this side before. Yeah.
I was intrigued that the people in Amsterdam that you wrote to welcomed you in. And I'm just curious about their story. When you hear about like the German guild, what did they offer you in that?
Okay. So I had a couple different Dutch people encounters. We'll put it that way. So the people who live in these apartments now weren't alive then. Okay. The Afrikaner plane, the first window I showed you, was a young couple. They were in their 20s. It's not like they had any guilt. It was their grandparents' generation. And actually I was saying, I was explaining and I was telling them what was going on and why I wanted to see, and that my mom's a Holocaust survivor, and they listened very carefully and nicely. And then was a couple, and the young man then said to me, yeah, I know a little bit about family trauma. My family's from South Africa. They were Black. However many family members had been killed during the apartheid. He had family history of trauma. So he told me the story. Another one of the places my mom lived, I was welcomed in, and it was a lesbian couple who lived there. And they could tell me about how they were very happy they lived in Amsterdam because it's such a welcoming city and LGBT rights and everything is great there. But there's other places where they're very happy they don't live. So it was interesting because every place I went, everybody had their own story of discrimination and hate and getting over that or getting away from it. So I learned a lot. But I also was at a dinner party at one point. A friend of my husband's, we were in the Netherlands. She invited us over. There was another writer there who writes about the Holocaust. We were all talking about writing. And then the other writer's husband looked at me and said, "It's possible my father might have once met your mother." I said, "Oh, how would that be?" And then he went on to say, he was a guard at the camp that you said your mom was a prisoner in. How do you, what do you say when somebody says that to you? And, at a dinner party, 3 couples and I'm like, I don't know. I started like right now, like I'm doing, just sort of mumbling and the words aren't coming out. And then he just finally said, "Don't worry. I don't talk to my father anymore. I've written him off. He was a terrible person. He used some words I won't use because I'm being filmed." Um, and I felt a little better, but still, when you're looking at history like this, you don't know what you're going to find. Yep.
Before you started the talk, we were talking that you've been to schools all across the country. I'm wondering, when you present to 7th and 8th graders, what are some of the most frequently asked questions that you get from kids?
My husband always says, "Write down the questions." I don't know that there's the most frequent questions. There's some really good questions, and then there's sort of the just the factual questions. But people ask, what did my mom miss the most? And I now know the answer to that is privacy. Never any privacy. You're always in masses of people. Was my mother afraid to bring her children into the world? What about anti-Semitism, and is it a dangerous place? And I'm like, well, no, I think, by the time she got to the United States, she was like, "We're in America. It's okay here." It's not perfect here. We have problems here too. But in the 1950s, 60s, when my brothers and I were born, maybe it wasn't so in your face, anti-Semitism. It was quieter. Yep.
When your mom hid in the attic, did the soldiers not check the houses?
What was happening is there were those razzias, those roundups were happening in that neighborhood. And so my grandfather was, like my mom said in that little video, she said her parents were having discussions about staying and hiding or leaving. They were really afraid that if the soldiers came and checked, not only would they be in trouble, but everybody in the building would be in trouble if they were caught and, those people were hiding them. And so they did not stay in hiding very long. They only stayed there 3 or 4 weeks. And I mean, then I'm now getting into plot twists in the story, so to speak. But then there was a reason that they felt it would be okay to leave the hiding spot. And the story continues. But
This is more about the process in writing. Now that you have this under your belt, do you plan to write more?
I've sort of started another book, but it's totally different. It's not in a kid's book. It's going to be an adult's book. And it's basically so the family's Jewish, but very secular Jewish. I went to Sunday school until I was in 4th grade. And then my dad said, "No, we want to go skiing in Vermont in the weekend. So you're not going to Sunday school anymore because skiing's more important than religion." I kind of grew up, no bat mitzvah. It was low key. And now my son is Hasidic. He lives in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. He was married a little over a year ago, complete with a matchmaker who helped him find his wife. And we're going all in on that side. I have another child who is in the LGBT world. So I've got these two sides. I'm trying to make it all work. We're all going to get along. This is my motto. We all get along no matter what. But I'd sort of, what is it like to be the parent of a kid who becomes very religious? It's a difficult path, but it's not impossible. You just find out where the kosher market is, which there really aren't that many in Vermont. So you come down to Massachusetts and Connecticut and go shopping a lot. The Crown. Yes.
I was wondering how your mother reacted when she read the book.
Well, first she told me not to write it. And I said, why don't you want me to write it? She goes, you're going to get depressed. And I said, Mom, I'm a therapist. I listen to depressing things all day. I'll be okay. And then when she read the first time I really had something I felt like I could show her, what she said was, you brought my family back. And I was just like, oh, I did it, So that was the best reaction I could get. And then like that postcard from the woman who I've never met, but I've talked to on the phone, who said, I got the atmosphere. So when people who I interviewed said I got it right, I was proud of myself, because that wasn't easy.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
I was curious in the book, after the war ended or they were released, they went back to the original apartment and they had given a lot of the artwork to the neighbor, right?
Yeah, well, it wasn't quite a neighbor, but a friend. Yeah.
I hope I have it right. Yeah, I read
Yep.
it a long time ago.
It's been out a while.
And then the neighbor said, "Oh, we didn't think you were," or the friend, "We didn't think you were going to come back." So did they sold it?
Well,
is there any way to prove the provenance? Because I'm sure they were.
Okay, so that friend, my grandparents had given the silver and my grandmother's fur coat and things of value to a friend for safekeeping. It wasn't just we didn't think you were going to make it back. It was we were promised the Jews wouldn't come back. This guy was a Nazi. Okay, he was a Dutch Nazi, but my grandfather didn't know it. So they just basically stole everything. They sold it, they used it, no, you can't stay in our house because we don't like Jews. But there is a painting. My grandmother had her parents had portraits done of her and her brother and her sister when they were teenagers. Big, big portraits that hung in the living room, and they all went missing. After the war, somebody came to my grandfather and said, I think I saw the portrait of Bobby in so-and-so's house. And they were able to prove that it was theirs, and the portrait was returned, and it hangs in my mom's house now. And that's the picture of my grandmother's brother who did not survive the war. So it was wonderful, that he's still there somehow. But yeah, things disappeared. You didn't know where they went. And that was just, I think I saw it in somebody's house. And somebody, I'm sure, didn't know where it came from or who it was. It was just a cute boy. Who knows what they thought about? It's there. I've learned not to give people credit unnecessarily, in that situation. When you get someone who says, yeah, my father might have known your mother because he was a guard in the camp, you start, don't give anybody from that era the benefit of the doubt until you know their story. Yep, another question? Teachers ask questions. I like teacher questions.
Do you think that this is a personal question, don't need to answer, but do you think that you became a psychologist because you kind of wanted to put all the pieces of your life together and just know about people and about your own history, or was it,
No, chemistry wasn't going well in college. And math was, I thought math was going to be easy, and then all the numbers went away. And then chemistry got a lot harder when you got to college from high school. And then I found this class in psychology, like, this is really cool. And then I just kept going. I don't
Sorry, one last one.
Yeah.
If you were to, go through another process of writing this book again from the start, is there anything you would have done differently?
Oh, good question.
I don't know. Nobody's ever asked me that one.
What was the question again?
If I wrote the book over again, what would I have done something differently? I might have tried to be more organized. I was doing like research, write a little, research a little, write a little, research a little, and it just, people say how many drafts? I don't know, 17 drafts, because I kept finding out more information. So I think if I had done it differently, I might have done as much of the research as possible first, have everything, and then start writing. I think that would have been the better for the process. Never would have finished, because there's always more to find out. As a matter of fact, after the book was published, I even found out more that I didn't know when it was published. So there's actually if you buy the book now, there's an extra 4 pages in the back of some information about where the falsified passport came from, which we didn't find out till afterwards. So there's.
So were you writing and working? I mean, did you do all this research, or did you have a job as well? I mean,
Oh, so I decided to write so I I had a private practice, and then I got remarried, and when I got remarried, the kids were little, and he had 2 kids and I had 2 kids, and everything was fine. And then the kids all were in middle school at the same time, and suddenly somebody had to be home with the kids and driving them, like there's snow days and dentists and orthodontists and karate, and basically I didn't have time for a job anymore, so I shut my practice down. I was stay-at-home mom. That lasted about a month, and then I'm like, I got to do something. I got to use my brain in a different way, and then I decided I'll try this book. Because it was just sort of, yeah, I'll be a stay-at-home mom. No, I'm not. I'm gonna. Yeah. And actually, my publisher just sent me an email just before we started. We found a translator. We're going to try to translate it into Spanish. So
it's still only in English.
It's only in English. We're trying for Spanish. Yeah. So.
Why not Dutch?
I've tried that route, but I haven't found anybody in Holland who wants to do it. There's a lot of, in Holland, there's a lot of books already, that's where it happened.
Yeah.
So they don't need my book. They've got enough books there already. So, and if you translate into Dutch, it's a very small amount of people that'll read it in Dutch. Not a lot of people in the world speak Dutch. Everybody in Holland speaks English. Not everybody elsewhere speaks Dutch. But I got pretty good at reading it when I was researching. Because when you're looking in archives, all the instructions on the page are in Dutch, and you got to figure out what's the accept this, and accept the cookies, and move, going back, and the index, and you got to figure out all those words in the language of the archive that you're looking at. So I figured out a lot. And Google Translate's great. You put the app on, and you hold it in front of your computer screen, and then you can read it in English, even though the screen is in a different language. Tools I learned along the way. But I can sell books, I can sign books, I can stand here, answer personal questions, or you can go home.
Thank you very much for coming today, Heidi.
You're welcome.
Thank you.